Hey friends, this is Allison Steele, and you're listening to Unravel with Allison, a show where I take a concept that's got me in knots, and we unravel it together. Thanks for being here. Let's get started.
Okay, y'all, today we are talking about peaks. Peaking, mountain peaks, highs and lows, and peekaboos. Our first definition of peak is to take a look, often in a furtive manner. So we're going to start with take a look because I get into perspective a lot, and we're going to cover that a little bit, as well as taking a look like taking a peek, like peeking around the corner or like shading your eyes to get a better look, kind of trying to get a better view of the situation from a different perspective, just peeking to see what's going on out there, like a nosy neighbor even. I'm the nosy neighbor. I never want to be involved in the trouble, but I always like to know what's going on. I like to be up to date, and not so I can be a busybody, but it offers comfort in my surroundings, knowing what people are up to. As an adult, I can do that from my home. I can literally peek out the windows and see what's going on. I can use the internet and everybody's public profiles to peek around on them and see what's going on. I can read a book and peek into somebody else's life and get an in-depth understanding of thoughts and feelings. But as much as I peek, I think that I'm led to ask questions from my understanding just as others are in my way. So when people peek in on my windows, there's not a whole lot of understanding there. I try on a lot of hats. I'll try on a lot of things that I don't care about. I may not always be excited to, but when I am excited to, I definitely go all in. And I'm a little nervous about it. I may stand on the sidelines for a while, but I'll ease my way into it. Most of my life, I wasn't in a position where I got to call the shots. And by the time I was old enough to call the shots, I had already bought into this idea that I work for someone else and they call the shots. So even as an employee, I still felt that my primary responsibility was to that company. So like I wouldn't call off of work because the company needed me kind of thing. Even though as an adult, I did have that space to make decisions, I still felt compressed by my surroundings. I didn't really feel like I was seen or heard in the way that I tried to see or hear others. And I mostly discovered this when I got in trouble. One of the biggest memories I have of getting in trouble was in the 4th grade. There was a boy that I liked, and we were passing notes, and we were talking about going to see a movie together. And as kids, we joke all the time. Like we're constantly joking and just referencing stuff that we've seen. We're just riffing. We're not thinking about actions and consequences, not in the same way that we do as adults, but we kind of forget that piece of it as adults, that's how kids work. They're kind of just going with the flow and working with what's right in front of them with the memory that they have, expressed with the humor that they are impressed by. So when I'm passing notes with this boy and we're talking about going to see this movie, we're talking about different movies that are out, and I make the joke that we could go sneak into an R-rated movie. I was such a scaredy cat because I never wanted to be in trouble. So this note makes it to the boy's house. After school, in a pocket, whatever, mom does some laundry, finds the note, asks who's the girl, gets the girl's mom's number, and the girl's mom comes to talk to me about it. It's me and my mom having a conversation about how this is inappropriate and how we shouldn't be sneaking into stuff and how I'm not only getting myself in trouble, but now this person, and now that this person is looking at my mom, like, what kind of kid are you raising here? And there's just a lot of moving parts from this one little note, when there was actually zero intention to sneak into a movie ever, because I wouldn't do that, because it's bad. But it's silly to joke about, right? Like everything is silly to joke about when you're a kid, because that's all you can really do. You can't choose who to spend time with and where to go and for what duration. It is all based on what somebody else is willing to allow you to do, which again makes sense. But coming from that perspective, when a parent says like this full frustration, like if your friends were jumping off a cliff, would you do it? No. But if I were there and it was happening, I probably wouldn't leave also. Respectfully, I would stick around just in case something happened because I'm a little gatekeeper like that. I'd probably tell my friends it's a bad idea and don't do it, but then when they do it anyway, somebody is around to get help or, whatever. Take a picture if it goes right. And all in all, I have a lot of really cool stories to tell because I've been around a lot of really cool places where really cool things were happening. And I've never given myself the badge. I've never said, I'm this, I'm that. I've always had a hard time with the labeling of things, of this is who you are and why, or this is what I do, so this is who I am. Other than if it was on a business card, I could embody that because that made sense. I had a title, I had a badge. That's what I was. But even though I had artistic expression, I would not consider myself an artist, especially doing fiber arts where I'm mostly working off a pattern that somebody else made. So to me, it's like I'm building IKEA furniture, but with yarn. It's the same kind of idea. Like I'm basically doing Legos, but you get a sweater instead. It never really struck me as you are an artist because you created this thing, because to me, it was like, no, I structured this thing. This person was the artist who created the pattern for this thing. And these words never bothered me. I never felt sad because I was not an artist or anything. But since I've come to embody the title, the badge of artist, it's very clear to see how it's been here all along and that my specific artistry factors into that pattern, and it's important. And it's not going to look the same as anybody else's, even if we all follow it to a T, just like anything else in life. And I'm skilled enough now where I can look back and check out something that I've made and say, oops, I wish that was bigger, or I wish that was different. And now I can unravel it and literally make it into something else just by looking at it. I know where to add things. I know where to subtract things. I know different stitches to factor in if I want it to make it look different. So it's not just like building IKEA furniture anymore. It is an immersive, adaptive experience. And it is artistry. And I'm going to go ahead and claim that shit now. I call myself an artist because I do art. But I've always seen myself as a beer more than a doer. Right now, I'm being an artist like an artist would be. I like to embody the character. And I think, again, just like when we were kids, we all get that. High school peak hilarity was dropping the perfect Step Brothers quote in class. When we all know the movie, we all know all the words, we all know the context. And when you drop it on a teacher with the slickest delivery, like a laugh riot breaks out. And it's one of the funnest moments to be in. Even now, dropping SpongeBob references on me will brighten up my day like nobody's business. Because when we're kids, we are dramatic on purpose because that's all we can get away with. You know, our parents might think that we're just hanging out with our friends at school all day. But in reality, we're in classes with our friends all day and we can't talk there either. So when I was in school, junior high, another time that I got in trouble was for kissing my friend. To set the scene for you here, we were in choir class, and it was just after a recital or just before a break. Either way, we weren't doing choir class that day. So we all are in the choir room, and they have it set up as like a little party where there's karaoke, and we're all just kind of sitting around in our little groups, having a good time and goofing off. One of my friends does karaoke to Brick House. We're singing and dancing and goofing off. We're off in our little circle. And another friend has a camera, turns it to us. I'm sitting next to my best friend. Turn to her, make a joke about a lesbian sex scene, grab her face, and then just go blah, blah, blah. Like stick my tongue out being a goofball. And I never kissed her. But when the teacher turned her head at that exact moment, she was mortified and told us to stop. At that point, I don't know what it looked like from her perspective, but we always goofed off this dramatically. I just thought she assumed she knew we were being us and blew it off. But it wasn't until I was in the next class that I got called down to the principal's office and I was getting suspended. I started popping off because I'm like, you know what? Every time I turn one of these corners, there's like 8 different couples making out. You're telling me I'm in trouble for kissing a girl when I didn't even kiss a girl and everybody's making out in your hallways? And again, it goes back to the whole thing. Doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. If everybody was jumping off a cliff, would you do it? Be responsible for yourself. Message received. Doesn't matter anyway because I can't prove it. Until another one of our friends comes up to the office and she says, no, we're not supposed to have cameras out, but I brought my camera and I have it here, and she didn't kiss her. Naturally, at this point, all of our parents are involved. It's super awkward. We were just goofing off, and now there's this extra hostility of just middle school garbage. So I end up not getting in trouble. I think maybe a day of in-school suspension or something like that with, oh, you know what? Yeah, this was actually the incident that kept me from being able to go to Cedar Point with the class. I wasn't allowed to go on a class field trip because of it. But again, my behavior, the joke that I made before the action that was misconstrued, all of it was just a joke and none of it was serious. But it was inappropriate at the time. So when did we get to goof off with our friends? I read a lot in elementary school and in middle school. Read all kinds of books, and I love that internal monologue, that first-person perspective in a book. Books to me are like peeking into lives, peering into somebody's soul, understanding beyond my experience by way of entertainment. And it really makes a big difference. Like, even if you can just watch the movie, don't miss out on the books. They can convey so much more in books than they're able to on screen. Like, when I say a movie ruined the book, it's because they couldn't craft that piece. the internal aspect. The true understanding and enlightenment that came from the book was not anything that you can put on screen. Their actions are meaningless without the intent behind them. Like, regardless of the topic, it just looks like an action movie, like one thing happening after another, but you don't get the full essence of it. Great example, the movie This Is Where I Leave You. The dad dies, and then four adult children come together in their hometown for the funeral. And it all kind of has this uncomfortable, gutsy feeling like they're in high school again, and there's just a lot of old shit coming up that needs addressed. The family themselves are like a little awkward with each other. They're shameful. They're hiding secrets. They're judging each other constantly. All this kind of stuff. Beautiful to read and understand. This movie comes out with Jason Bateman, Tina Fey, Adam Driver, Ben Schwartz, Jane Fonda, Dax Shepard, some of my favorite actors. This was like the top of the line cast for me. All these people crack me up, and they destroyed one of my favorite books because of the missing piece. The entire book was in the internal monologue, was in the headspace, was in the thoughts. And a voiceover here and there just does not do that justice. Books don't have to interest me for me to read them. I definitely have a preference for like that first person point of view, but like the topic was fair game. And at this point, reading about all these books, like I didn't understand people. I was a kid. I couldn't really. But if I could relate them to a character in a book I've read, and even then, I read a lot of books and I didn't retain information on the stories or basically anything like that. Even when I tried to keep a list of books that I read for a year, I would go back and be like, I don't even remember what this book was about. But I did have this feeling in my heart that like, oh, I remember I love that one. I remember I love that name. I remember what that book cover looks like. And I love that too. Even if I don't remember the context, because it was like a full relational thing. It wasn't just like this weird little exchange. But it made me feel safer in that I could read about people who were very different from me and experienced very different lives than mine. And when I hear them talk about their situation, I feel it in my heart. I feel it in my stomach. I get excited to turn the page. I am worried for the character. I'm excited for the character. I'm heartbroken along with the character. When I get fully immersed in a book, I don't want to do anything else but experience it. And I'm kind of the same way with people and friendships. Being in school growing up, again, you're in classes with your friends. You don't really get to talk to your friends. So you have to try to get your parents to get in touch with their parents, figure out something to do, if they're allowed to come over, if you're allowed to go over, if you live close enough to figure it out on your own. Like, there's a lot of moving parts to try to work into not a whole lot of time to talk to people. So a lot of times if I wanted to hang out with my friends on the weekend, their parents would say, fine, they can come to church with us. So I visited a lot of churches, and just like with books and just like with churches, it doesn't really matter. As long as I get to do the part that I want to do, which is at a weird church, hanging out with my friend who's going to the weird church, or reading a book that was recommended by a friend. I had so much exposure, people I didn't want to be around and information I wasn't interested in, but I played along because I got to hang out with my friends. It was me taking on the main character role of, if this is what I have to work with, this is what I'm gonna do about it. That first definition of peek, to take a look in a furtive manner. What does furtive mean? Attempting to avoid notice or attention, typically because of guilt or a belief that discovery would lead to trouble, suggestive of guilty nervousness. I am a very furtive person. The first time I heard that word was in the Frank Turner song, I Knew Proof Rock Before He Was Famous. The song is about him and his buddies and what they're capable of and what they're doing and why they're doing it. You know, the starving artists who have the greatest ideas in the world, but almost on the guest list, always stuck in traffic. So towards the end of the song, pulled some lyrics. I'm going to recite them for you now. Again, this is Frank Turner, I Knew Proof Rock Before He Was Famous. I'm sick and tired of people who are living on the B list. They're waiting to be famous and they're wondering why they do this. And I know I'm not the one who's habitually optimistic, but I'm the one who's got the microphone here, so just remember this. Life is about love, last minutes, and lost evenings. About fire in our bellies and furtive little feelings. The aching and the amplitudes that set our needles all a-flickering and help us with remembering that the only thing that's left to do is live. Not saying get over these feelings and move on with your life, but this entirety is what life is about. The aching amplitudes that set our needles all a-flickering and help us with remembering that the only thing that's left to do is live. Now, the song I Knew Proof Rock Before He Was Famous, I had no idea where that came from, but I did the smallest amount of research, came up with a publication in 1963, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. And I pulled a little something from that. I'm going to share that with you here too. Again, keep that furtive in mind. Attempting to avoid notice or attention, typically because of guilt or a belief that discovery would lead to trouble. Trouble, again, is where I feel the most misunderstood, and I feel the most peaked on when I get in trouble. So here it is. Love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. In the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. And indeed there will be time to wonder, do I dare? And do I dare? Time to turn back and descend the stair, with a bald spot in the middle of my hair. They will say, how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin. My necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute there is time for decisions and revisions, which a minute will reverse. For I have known them all already, known them all, have known the evenings, mornings, afternoons. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. I know the voices dying with a dying fall, beneath the music from a farther room. So how should I presume? And I have known the eyes already, known them all, the eyes that fix on you in a formulated phrase. And when I am formulated, sprawling on a pin, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin? To spit out all the butt ends of my days and ways? And how should I presume? Being noticed is one of my least favorite things on the planet, because it feels troublesome. That feeling, again, do I dare disturb the universe? Because that's kind of how the reaction makes it feel when you're expressing it. When somebody so shockingly turns to you with a halting phrase, shutting you up, quieting you down, expressing their discomfort in your regularity. I hear people say that if you don't speak up, nothing changes. But I don't understand why everybody wants to change everybody. I was the most annoying kid based on the adults around me that told me so. I was the youngest. My older siblings thought the same thing. My boldest, brightest, peakiest expression, my top tier, was their devastation. That was their valley. And I get it. There's this Seinfeld joke that the number one fear is public speaking. Number 2 is death. But number 1 is public speaking. It doesn't take long to wonder why that is and get an answer. Find a toddler and give them a microphone. Bring me that toddler in 20 years and let me see if it's afraid of public speaking. Because how do you treat a toddler with a microphone? Like they're the biggest fucking nuisance on the planet. And how does a toddler feel with a microphone? Big, loud, laughing, bold, goofing off, dramatic for the sake of it. And we just stomp it out. So peaks, as in the measurements, the highest reach, the greatest maximum, it's not always the best, but it often is the boldest. You know, with a measuring tool, sets the needles all a-flickering. If your needle's flickering, it's because there's a back and forth. There's a pulse. It's not always an up and a down. It's not always highs and lows, but it's away from form. It's away from that middle ground. So if that middle line is boredom, then you can be at the maximum height of it, and that's somebody else's low. Or if you can be at your low, you can look at it as a stair step. Like you've got nothing but good to come out of this now. With every good thing you do, you're stepping further and further back to your baseline. But when you're that high off a mountain and somebody takes your microphone and kicks you down, it doesn't feel like you're tumbling from your top to your baseline. You go from top to bottom. You go from your max to their minimum. You go from your peak to their valley. And not saying that you have to stay there with them. You don't have to agree with them, even if they have a point. To take it a little bit off of self, but just back to like how we think about things. The way that I looked at making money when I was a tipped employee, it was just like, okay, this money that's coming in is going straight to that bill. This money that's coming in is going straight to that bill. It was on a day by day thing because I didn't have an expectation versus the amount of hours that I worked. It wasn't like I was getting paid $15 an hour and I could expect $15 an hour. It was I'm working for 4 hours and I could make $25 or $250. But then I talk to people who don't live in that world. And I cannot stand how other people look at money, how they look at spending. If you're going to look at going to Taco Bell and buying a meal and looking at the total and being like, wow, that was an hour and a half's worth of work. Oof, dude. But then when I was an hourly employee and I really thought about things that way, I decided I'm never going to think about things that way because it sucks. It sucks to put that dollar amount on your name. It really sucks to look at everything you purchase of how many hours it took out of your life and what that does to you as a person. Like, are you having a good time? Because like, I don't see how you can be when you can choose to look at life in any other way. And if that keeps you frugal and that's all it takes, then sure. Different strokes for different folks. But it's that easy of the highs and the lows of me being able to realize that I sank to a low, acknowledged it, saw that this is an option and noped out of it. went right back to baseline, decided far against. It wasn't a battle back up the hill to baseline. It was just a decision that says, I don't have to think like this. Y'all can live like that and it can be true for you. Y'all can look at my paychecks and y'all can look at my life and my spending, and you can look at it the same way if you want to. But that is a miserable way to live and you will get nothing done. You'll feel bad about money all the time. And not that I have a great relationship with money, because I am really great at debt management, because I never experienced life without debt. As soon as I was in high school and on my own, my mom helped me buy a car. She paid for my phone for a stretch. She helped me out a lot. But even then, I still had bills to pay. I still instantly had debt going to college. I just learned how to manage my debts. If I wanted something, I was going to have to take out a loan to get it. I couldn't save up enough money to do that, but I could make enough money to do that. Again, tipped world is kind of crazy, but that's what my relationship with money was like. Because if I can afford it on one end, I can afford it on another. You can either save up and pay it in 4 years, or you can take out the loan on the front end and pay it over the 4 years. And this is for whatever. But I got good at being able to judge what I could realistically pay. So I'm like house broke, to where I have all the things that I want, but I can just barely afford them. But early 20s, that's what I was doing, was just juggling my debts. And because of that, I got a car, I got a house, I got to go to the Dominican Republic, I got to go to Vegas, I got to go to Texas. And anything else that I did and anywhere else that I went was paid for by a company, and the time that I spent away was not a vacation. But the things that I carved out for myself, the things that I want in life, I can't afford them. And if I wait until I can, I won't. I wasn't set up with a fallback. I just created my own along the way, which is really weird and really hard and really awkward. And there's a lot of judgment around it from others, where I can sink to their level if I choose to, or we can just talk perspective. I remember telling my parents that I didn't really live anywhere the summer after my senior year of high school. At the end of the school year, I was living with my friend and her grandma. But then it kind of got into this thing where all of my stuff ended up in my car because I had a curfew. So if I wasn't going to make it home by curfew, I would let her know. So if I was going to be working until 2 a.m., I wouldn't come home that night. But since school was out, I was picking up all these extra hours because I was depressed. I didn't know what else to do. I was making money and I chose to work. So I was working all these extra hours, wasn't coming home. I was driving my friend home from work, and we just stayed and talked for hours until that kind of developed into its own little relationship where the two of us kind of palled around and were more like couch hopping. It was still in that high school era where sleepovers were normal, but also this odd feeling of where will I end up? Because it's not that I had nowhere to go or nobody to rely on or no home to call my own, but the circumstances on a day-to-day basis were so outlandish that I couldn't claim a home, and I could ask for help. And I would joke that I lived out of my car. I didn't live in my car because I never slept in my car. I never spent a night in my car. I always had somewhere to go. I always ended up somewhere. But it was this weird kind of floating through the day thing where I didn't know where I was going to go. I didn't know where I was going to end up. And that made my parents very sad that I didn't come to them when I could have. But again, that's a problem on their end, that they hear that their kid is living out of a car. That is an uncomfortable thing to hear as a parent. But as the kid doing it, it didn't feel detrimental. It didn't feel scary. It didn't feel uncomfortable. It was just something that was happening right now. And I recently shared this with my other parent, who was like, I had no idea. That's weird. And I didn't know about that. And it's just part of that separation. When you leave home, I remember telling my mom one time after I moved out that I was going on a trip. And I called her. I'm like, I know that I don't have to ask for permission, but it feels weird to not tell you that I'm leaving. So this is where I'm going and this is where I'm going to be. I mean, I used to do that back when we were in high school too. My friends would lie to their parents about where they were going and what they were doing and who they were going to be with and when they were coming home. I didn't. And if I couldn't tell my mom, then I didn't do the thing. I didn't want to get in trouble. So my mom just kind of always knew that stuff. And it came in handy on more than one occasion because everybody was lying. Something goes down. Now there's a parent in action. And then sometimes I would call and say, hey, this happened. I need a ride. And she said, okay, I'm picking you up. Then we're moving on. But I remember my mom going to Chicago after I moved out. I was in college and everything. And I'm like, how dare you not tell me where you are going and what you are doing? What if I came home this weekend and you just weren't there? It's goofy. But that whole separation part, it's so weird. You don't know what peaking feels like. You don't know what the highs feel like and the lows feel like until you do it and then actually have time to observe what the outcome was and how it happened. And I don't think we should focus on staying at that baseline. I don't think we should focus on the highs and the lows, But just remember that it's the amplitude that sets our needles flickering. It is the pulse of life. Be okay with making waves. To peak and to just protrude slightly as to just be visible. I always wanted to be a part of the group, but never the standout. I remember marching band was such a big deal for me in high school because my aunt was in the marching band and she made it sound like the funnest thing ever. I wanted to do it because she had such a good time doing it. So same high school, the marching band was so big for so many years that they didn't allow freshmen in. It was only sophomore through senior. So when I became a sophomore, that was my first year in the marching band. So you already have that first year discomfort, awkwardness of being a freshman that everybody goes through of acclimation. But then that second year, you're supposed to be like comfortable and ready and not have that, that sophomore year, it's not your first rodeo. There's another level of comfort that comes into it. But then joining the band that year, you were the newcomer again. I played the saxophone. One of the first days at band camp, they're taking inventory of who plays what. You have to make it even so it looks good on the field. I played saxophones and I was sitting with the saxophone players. Somebody walks up to our group and says, hey, I said, no, somebody from this group needs to go to low brass. The section leader called out, nose goes. The nose goes game means that you all put your finger on your nose and the last person to do it is the one that goes. I didn't really know nose goes at that time, so I didn't do the reaction. It's like last one, there's a rotten egg. I didn't touch my nose and I got sent to low brass. Overall, that was embarrassing because it was like, here's a group that you're in and that you just got forced out of because you didn't know the game. But then going over to low brass, I got to learn how to play the trombone. My best friend played the trombone. Trombones and tubas play together. That's the low brass section. My other best friend played tuba. So it was like I was with my best friends. I was with the people I preferred to be with, but it still was like, you're new here too on top of being new here. Like I went from being comfortable playing saxophone to being given a trombone that I don't even know how to use. Like I could barely make sound out of it. Playing it is different and reading the music is different. It's bass clef and I don't really get it. And there's nobody around to really teach it to me. So I had to learn how to play this instrument by sitting with everybody else, learning the positions, and being able to listen and match the pitch. All of my trombone experience is muscle memory, but I was able to go out and not make an ass of myself during the marching band season. The cherry on top of that year, of that whole season, the whole marching band start was the initiation night, is what they called it. It's supposed to be a team building, coming together kind of thing, where the seniors and the sophomores, the newbies, kind of have a night of like goofiness. It's basically like if you've seen Dazed and Confused where there's that like freshman hazing scene, it's basically like sugar-coated that. So like they still did the air raid thing where like you call out an air raid and all the youngins sizzle on the ground like bacon, but then they would like dress you up in different stuff and make you look silly, and like it was really cheesy. But I still, that night started off for me like getting picked last for dodgeball. So like one by one, the sophomores are in one area and all the seniors are lined up, and one by one the senior calls out a sophomore name and they kind of run off into their groups. And there were maybe like 3 people left when a senior who played the flute, called my name off and said my name wrong to begin with. Got the last name right, so I knew it was me, but I'm like, man, is there any other sign that I'm not supposed to be here? Because like I am not feeling welcome here. I made an appearance and I wish that I hadn't. I want to protrude slightly just to be visible. I want to participate in the outcome, but all of this early stuff, like it is almost at every point in life has felt so obvious to me that this is not where I belong. It's always a sense of not really belonging, like almost kind of, but not really. Like visiting churches when I was young. Like I was welcome there, but you're not one of us. So then I started approaching the rest of life like that. I'm not one of you. I'm not an artist, but I'll do the art. I'm not this, but I'll do that. I'm not this, but I'll do that. When I was in middle school, I would ask a friend for book recommendations because they were reading all the time. I say, what are you reading now? I'm going to get that next. I'd be like, oh, I'll get you a list of something else. I'll get you some other books to read. I'll get you some. I'm like, why don't you just let me read what you're reading, dude? Why you gotta be weird about it? I'm interested in that too. So I end up reading these books, and there are a lot of themes of like homosexuality, questioning. And so I had this exposure all at a pretty young age compared to anything that my parents experienced. And I didn't really care about it, and I didn't really have questions about it because the books that I was reading kind of covered it pretty well. Like, this is an emotional issue and this is how I'm handling it, just like any other situation. It starts with this is how I'm feeling and this is what comes of it. That's how the book goes. So by the time that I was in college, I went to go visit my friend in college at Oberlin, which is like a liberal arts college. And it was at this point, this is probably 2012. And this is the first time that I heard about like pronouns and like people introducing themselves with pronouns. And I already had some exposure, like I said, from these books and everything, that like I didn't really care what people called what or what names people went by or anything. It kind of seemed to me at that time that I was introduced to it like it was a game. Like, oh, it's just a thing we do here. Like, okay, cool. I'm just peeking. I'm just seeing what's up. This is what they do over there. And it sounded respectable and fun and everything. And nobody was like, you got to call me this and you got to call me that. Or we do this because it means this. It just seemed to me, again, expressed to me like it was a game that they're playing. So that way I had the information on the front end that when somebody prompted me down the road, I knew what I was doing and I didn't look like an idiot. Appreciated my friend for that. But I also wasn't like struck with this, what is that? Why are they doing it? And who's telling me that I got to call people this? And who's telling me that I got to call people that? And why can't things just be the way they were? Again, it just made sense because of the presentation, because of the people, and because of my previous exposure that I didn't care. So the friend that I borrowed all those books from came out in high school as gay. And everyone's like, did you know? Of course you knew. You read all those books. Like, well, I guess I maybe could have guessed. But I also read all those books and I didn't take those on for myself. But when she came out in high school, it was a big deal. And then when I got to the point where I had my first attraction to a woman, it was just another thing that was happening. And it was kind of exciting and it was kind of scary and it was kind of all of those things. But it wasn't scary because I felt bad or wrong. But then when I came public with it, in another same-sex relationship as an adult, I was comfortable expressing it. And it was weird to people, like, you never really came out. So do you still like boys? Are you still gay? Does this mean this? Does this mean that? What are you? I'm like, I don't really care. I don't really know what you want to call me. I don't really know what I'm filed under. But this person in front of me that I'm holding hands with, I like them a lot. This time it's a woman. Last time it was a man. I don't really know how to explain attraction, but you know it when you feel it. And if you have the opportunity to embrace it, why would you deny that because you don't have a title that goes... No, I'm not going to let a title keep me from living my life. But I'm not going to embody a title just because of my actions either. So now that I've had kids of my own with a man raising in that environment, what does that say? What does that say about you? Are you going to tell your kids about this? Are you going to tell your kids about that? I hope my kids aren't in a world where people ask silly questions like this because I still don't care at all. I still don't put a title on my sexuality. I've peeked into a lot of rooms. I've peeked into a lot of hearts. I've had a lot of highs and a lot of lows. That highest point is not always the best, but it's almost always the boldest.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Unravel with Allison. If you have any feedback, questions, want to chit chat, or stay up to date on new releases, follow me on Instagram at Allison K. Steele. Let's keep in touch. Again, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next episode.